Hello friends, this is Rachel from Rachel's Lovely Stitches. If you've been here before, thank you for joining me for this week's tutorial. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and hit the bell notification to be notified of future tutorials. I upload a new crochet tutorial every Friday. Now let's jump right into this week's tutorial. This week's tutorial will be for the Crochet Pumpkin. This pumpkin can be done in multiple sizes. If you want a smaller pumpkin, just use a smaller crochet hook and smaller yarn. If you want a bigger pumpkin, use a larger crochet hook and a larger yarn. I would suggest, if you're using a worsted weight yarn, to use a 4.5mm hook. I used a 5mm hook and a worsted weight yarn on this pumpkin, and you can see how it has gaps in the stitches. This one I used a 4.5mm hook and a worsted weight, and there's no gaps. For this tutorial, we will need a number 4 worsted weight yarn and 2 collars. You will want your stem to be green, or if you prefer a brown, and whatever main color you want your pumpkin. I will be making this with a white. This one was done in Red Heart Super Saver Buff and Red Heart Super Saver in the color Carrot. For this tutorial, I will be using Red Heart Super Saver in the colors Paddy Green and the color White. I will also be using a 4.5mm crochet hook, scissors, and a yarn needle. Links to the supplies I used will be in the description box below. We will begin by making the stem and the vines. To make the stem, we will begin with the green. We will start with a magic ring or a magic circle. This is how I do mine. I loop it around my first 2 fingers, and then loop it around the back, and insert my hook under the front loop and over top of the second loop, pull it around and turn, and there's my magic ring. I also like to start my magic rings with a chain 1. That's probably not necessary. We will begin by making 6 single crochets in our magic ring. Close up our loop. Slip stitch to our first single crochet. We will then chain 1. We will place 1 single crochet increase in each stitch around. A single crochet increase is just 2 single crochets in the same stitch. We will have a total of 12 single crochets at the end of this round. And if you want, you can use a stitch marker to keep place of your first stitch. When we get to the end of this round, we will join to the first stitch of the round with a slip stitch. For round 3, we will chain 1. For this round, we will be working in the back loop only. To work in the back loop, see those 2 loops? Those 2 loops are your first stitch. You want to work in that back loop. So working in the back loop only, we will make 1 single crochet in each stitch around. You will have 12 single crochets at the end of round 3. When we reach the end of round 3, we will join to the first stitch of the round with a slip stitch. For round 4, we will chain 1. We will place 1 single crochet in each stitch around. You will have a total of 12 single crochets at the end of round 4. When we get to the end of round 4, we will make a slip stitch in the first stitch to join. When we reach the end of round 5, we will place a slip stitch in the last stitch to join. You will then finish off your work, leaving a yarn tail long enough to sew the stem onto the pumpkin. We will now be working on the vine. We will be working with the green, and we will make a chain of 9. We will be making the small vine first. We will then place 3 single crochets in each chain, starting with the second chain from the hook. Pause the video here and move me back after you've worked your 3 single crochets in each of the chains. To make the longer vine, we will continue using the green, and we will make a chain of 19. We will then work 3 single crochets in the second chain from the hook. And just like the small vine, we will work 3 single crochets in each of the chains after. Continue working your 3 single crochets in each chain across, and meet me back here when you get to the end. When you reach the end, you will finish off your yarn, leaving a long tail to sew your vine to the base of your stem. And like the small vine, by working 3 single crochets in each of the chain, it will cause your chain to curl, making a kind of a vine. Now that we have our stem and our vines completed, we will begin on the pumpkin. To begin the pumpkin, we will make a chain of 21. We will also be using your main pumpkin collar. We will then place 1 half double crochet in the second chain from the hook. We will work 1 half double crochet in each of the next 19 stitches. At the end of this first round, you will have 20 half double crochets. When we reach the end of round 1, we will turn our work. For rounds 2 through 22, we will chain 2, and this chain 2 counts as your first stitch. We will work 1 half double crochet in the back loop only in the second chain, hold on. For rounds 2 through 22, we will chain 2. We will work 1 half double crochet in the back loop only of the next stitch. We will work 1 back, gosh dang it. For rounds 2 through 22, we will chain 2. That chain 2 counts as your first stitch. So working in the next stitch, we will work 1 half double crochet in the back loop only. We will then work 1 half double crochet in the back loop only of each of the next stitches. It should be the next 19 stitches. You will have 20 half double crochets at the end of each round for rounds 2 through 22. Remember to place your last half double crochet in that chain stitch. You don't want to forget it, or your pumpkin will end up being kind of crooked. And then turn your work. Continue working these rounds until you reach round 23. Pause the video here and meet me back when you get to round 23. When we reach the end of round 22, this is what it should look like. Working in the back loop only will give you this little raised stitch here. It'll make it look like kind of bumpity. To continue, we will fold our work so that the two short sides are touching. We'll chain 1 and turn, and you can either work slip stitches down the side to join the two sides, or you can work single crochets down the side. Now work your single crochets or your slip stitches down this entire short side, being sure to get both sides to connect. I will meet you back here when you get to the end of this round. When you get to the end and you have the two short sides connected with either your single crochets or your slip stitches, I did slip stitches. This is what your work should look like. You should have like a tube. We will then finish off our work, leaving a tail long enough to close up the end. I would say maybe about 18 inches would be a good length. Now using a yarn needle, or I think it's called a darning needle, you will thread the needle, and the way that I close up the top or the bottom, whichever it ends up being, I weave my needle in and out through each round. pull it in, pull it through, weave in and out through all 22 rows. When you get back to the beginning, we'll pull it tight. You see that? That is our beginning tail from when we first started the pumpkin. And you don't want to weave your yarn in too high, too far from the end, because then it'll make your pumpkin stick out, and you don't really want that. Alright, close it off nice and tight, but don't break your yarn. And then I just tie it off right here. Right there. And leave your tail long, because we will be using that later on. Now this is what it should look like. Closed bottom or closed top. And then the open end on the other end. You will now get your Fiberfil filling. When filling your pumpkin, you do not need a large amount of the Fiberfil filling. You want to stuff it enough, but you don't want it packed too tightly. Just get it in there. That is a little too much, so I'm going to take a little bit out of mine. That looks like it could be about right. Alright. Now, we will cut another piece of yarn about 18 inches or so, maybe 24 inches. And we will thread it onto our yarn needle. And we will do the same with this side as we did the other end, weaving our yarn needle in and out through each row. When you pull this one through, since it's not attached to anything, don't pull it completely through, because you want to be able to tie it off at the end. In and out through each round, each row. We will wait until we get it through each row before we tighten it up. When we reach the beginning of where we first started, we'll tighten it up, holding on to both ends. Tighten it up. Don't make it too tight. You don't want to break your yarn. And tie it off. Make it tight so you don't have too big of a hole there. Double tying mine, maybe triple tying. And since this has got a little hole in the top and this side doesn't, this will be my bottom and this will be my top, because when I attach the stem, it'll cover this hole. Now what we will do, keeping the yarn and the yarn needle, we'll take it around. I like to put it in between where the raised stitches are. Insert our needle into the bottom. It can be kind of difficult with that filling in there. Try to get it in through there. Push your yarn needle through the top of your pumpkin and tighten it up. And that will make, well, don't make it too tight, but that will make your little kind of ridges like that. That's where I put my yarn tail. And this is where the raised stitches are that we crocheted in the back loop only. Continuing around, you can either do it in each between every 2 rounds or every 4 rounds. Make it tight enough so that it makes that little cinching right there. And when your yarn is too small to be taken around again, we'll just tie it off with one of the smaller yarn tails, and we will weave that in when we're done. Now, working with the other yarn tail, we will continue this process, taking it around between the round, tighten it up, tight, and tie it off. You will then weave in all 4 of your ends. We will now be working with our stem and our vines. You will choose which side you want to be the top and which one you want to be the bottom. Now you can choose to either lightly stuff your stem or don't stuff your stem. I prefer to lightly stuff mine. So, just a tiny bit of Fiberfil, and then place it where you want it. And you can use pins to help secure it down while you sew it on, or not. It's just a personal thing, personal preference. When you get it to where you want it, we will sew the stem to the pumpkin. After you have attached your stem, you will weave in your ends. We will now work on attaching the vines. We have a smaller vine and a larger vine. You will just, depending on where you decide you want it and how you want your pumpkin to look, you will just attach your vines, sew them on, and weave in your ends. Your crochet pumpkin is now complete. I hope you liked this tutorial. If you did, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification. I upload a new crochet tutorial every Friday. Be sure to like this video and share it with your crochet friends. Until next week, happy crocheting!